Hi, I'm Jeff Payne and I'm part of the communications team here at BehaviourWorks Australia. We're a research institute, part of the Monash Sustainable Development Institute, looking at behaviour change. Pocket Change is a series of short videos. We produce one each month, looking at the work of our researchers and their research and how they can change the world for the better. Hi everyone. This month I'm speaking to Lena Jungbluth, who is a PhD candidate and researcher here at BehaviourWorks Australia. So many of us may not understand how big the problem is when it comes to hospital or healthcare waste.
Yes, the healthcare system creates huge amounts of waste. So there was a study done a few years ago that looked at waste generated in New South Wales, and they found that the healthcare system was responsible for 8% of the waste generated in the New South Wales economy. And so that's obviously the whole healthcare system, and hospitals make up a large part of that.
And did this problem get worse during COVID with all the PPE and all that equipment?
Yes, so absolutely. So COVID generated a lot more waste. And you're probably all familiar with the stories that we've seen at the times of how much more waste it created. I remember certainly reading a lot of articles in different outlets around various waste stories of the healthcare system.
Yeah. Can all healthcare waste be recycled?
No. So it depends on what we're talking about when we're talking about healthcare waste, right? And there is different terms used for different waste types. It's not always 100% consistent, but generally in healthcare we've got hazardous waste and non-hazardous waste. So hazardous waste is anything that, for example, has blood on it, and non-hazardous waste, there's various different types, like things that are pretty much our general waste, but also recyclable waste, which looks reasonably similar sometimes to what you find in your household, like paper. It can be cans, metals, glass, and then there's also specific streams in hospitals that or in healthcare that you predominantly find there that can be recycled, like they, for example, have a sterilization wrap to keep instruments sterile, so that's a specific stream that is recyclable. Some hospitals recycle their single-use metal instruments, so that's metal. And I think there's also some existing research that's quite exciting where they're looking into recycling new products like face masks, and so there's obviously ongoing research around how you can recycle more and more products.
What are some of the drivers and barriers to hospital waste recycling?
Yeah, right. So there is lots, and actually they also can differ. So depending on which hospital you look at, the drivers and barriers might be different. But just looking at the literature, what seems to come up pretty consistently is, for example, a lack of space to put additional bins. So a lot of hospitals, they were built in different times, and then when they're looking at, where can we actually put more recycling bins or take those recycling bins and move them on, they just run into space issues. Mm-hmm. So that's a pretty common one. Related to that then is obviously access to bins, because if you can't fit another bin, you can't recycle a certain material if there is no bin for you to do that. There's various other barriers and drivers in the literature. One that also comes up a fair bit is sort of the provision of information and lack of knowledge around what can and can't be recycled and what are the sort of detailed rules around that. And another barrier we can find is, for example, a lack of the recycling system. So there is various materials that could be recycled, but you don't necessarily have a recycler who can deal with them. And we see this right now with the soft plastics crisis, that there has been challenges around where to put this material once it's been separated and put somewhere for further processing. There obviously needs to be somebody who can take that. Yeah. And there's challenges around that sometimes as well.
So when it comes to hospital waste and recycling, who needs to do what differently, and has this been studied before?
That is a really good question, because so it's actually a fairly complex interaction of various different behaviors that you find when you talk about hospital waste recycling, because you have various people, staff groups, who in the first place need to sort the recycling material appropriately, so place the materials in the appropriate bin in various streams, obviously. But then it doesn't stop there, because then you have a nicely sorted bin which needs to be transported on, or the material from within that bin needs to be transported on. So you've got then the people who are responsible for that, like it can be technicians, it can be cleaners, depending on how the hospital is structured. So you need them to take that stream appropriately to the next location. Then there might be another group who takes it from there to say the basement or the waste stock or whatever. So there's various sort of stops where this waste goes, and you need all these groups to do the appropriate waste management behavior for the recycling chain to function. So depending on, again, I think it depends very much also on the hospitals. Like some are really well set up with that, others are more in their infancy of setting up recycling processes. So it's hard to answer this as a sort of silver bullet answer of who needs to do what differently. It's just more working out who are the actors involved in a given hospital and what do we need them to do, and then checking, like, does this all already work, or do we need to tweak things at a certain stage while others are okay.
Okay. Tell us about your waste audit and waste mapping. This is quite a complex task, isn't it? Because there are so many interconnected teams and individuals.
It was a big task, but I absolutely loved it. So, having done a previous project that sort of gave me an insight into what I'm dealing with when I'm talking about behaviors in the waste management area in hospitals, I knew from my PhD that I needed to get a really good understanding of, who is involved in the waste management. And so in my PhD, I'm partnering with the Royal Melbourne Hospital in Melbourne here, and specifically with the operating theatres. And so in the waste mapping, what we did is basically we mapped out exactly like who is dealing with which waste in which theatre location, and then also how does this waste go in the first bin, and how does that content from that first bin go into the next bin, and who is basically involved with that. Basically what I just talked about before. How does the waste flow all the way through the hospital until it reaches the waste stock, where it's getting picked up by the recycler or the waste contractor. And with that, we then had a really good overview of, all the different behaviors and staff groups who are performing those behaviors that are involved in the process. And with the waste audit, so essentially doing this map and doing it to the level of detail that we did, we came up with over 180 waste management behaviors, which was obviously way too many to work with, even if it's a PhD of 3.5 years. And then we did a number of different prioritization activities, but one of them was the waste audit to help us understand, which streams actually have room for improvement when it comes to recycling. Because we just mapped out all the behaviors that existed. That didn't mean that they all had issues with them. Some of them were working perfectly fine. So we just needed to have a look at the actual waste data and see, how much recyclable materials are we finding in the general waste and so forth. Yeah.
So if you've got 180 different waste management behaviours mapped out, how do you prioritise? Where do you begin when you've got so many to choose from?
Yes, that's another good question that I was thinking a lot about in my PhD, because there exist really good tools in the behavioral science literature about how you can prioritize different behaviors. A lot of them assume that you need behaviors that are pretty much independent from each other, which in my case wasn't so much applicable, because as I said before, like you need the first person, you need the next person, you need the third person, so they're pretty much interlinked. So we used the map that we had created to work out, where can we start, and did a bit of a group discussion around which behaviors are already working and which aren't. And what we found then in the process was that a lot of the behaviors that had issues were predominantly on the sorting level, where people put items in the bin. So that particular hospital had the transport side pretty much sorted. That worked okay. And it was mainly of sort of, putting the right items into the right bins. So that already narrowed it down a lot. And then we could apply some of the existing methods to sort of prioritize, like Sarah Niebone's impact likelihood matrix, which we've talked about in another pocket change.
Yep.
And yeah, we also use the waste audit then to find out, which streams have room for improvement. And yeah, so essentially, after a long back and forth, various conversations, we then landed on soft plastics recycling and the related soft plastics recycling behaviours as the priority behaviours for my PhD moving forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and this may be too big a question, who or what can make the most difference?
That again depends on your local context, I would say. Like, it depends on if you, for example, have a hospital that doesn't have any recycling streams, providing staff with recycling bins and the processes behind that would probably make a big difference. If you have a hospital that already has all this and it's still not happening, you are obviously looking at other intervention options to get that behavior happening. So I think it really depends on the particular facilitators or drivers and barriers in a circumstance that you're working in.
And where are you at with your PhD and your research and your studies? Are you close?
I think so. So I have completed all my data collection as of last month, which is very, very exciting. Mm-hmm. So now I just need to write everything up for publication, and I'll do that next year because I'm having a baby first.
Well, I think the baby takes priority.
Yes.
At this stage. That's a good prioritisation right there. Lena, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to know more about our research projects and the courses we do, you can visit the website at behaviourworksaustralia.org.